What the hell was that? Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, I'll be discussing my thoughts on Season 2, Episode 10 of Star Trek Discovery, entitled The Red Angel. And I have to give them props from right out of the gate, giving us this sort of signal flare that yes, indeed, the Red Angel is Michael Burnham. I have been saying, not only on my own videos, but elsewhere in the comments of other people's videos, I've been saying, I really don't want the Red Angel to be Burnham. And they kind of caught me off guard with going straight to that in the earliest portion of this episode. Just brandishing that from right out of the gate. You know, it gained my respect, put it that way. That being gobsmacked and blindsided by that fact, being immediately put out there, really gained my respect. And I was like, okay, all right, I'm on board. I'm on board to see where this is going to go. And instead of playing footsie under the table, instead of playing games, leading us along the primrose path of speculation and not knowing what in the hell was actually going to happen, I'm just like, all right, awesome. All right, this is what you're doing. You're going to put it out on the table right away. Let's see where this is going to go. And this entire episode was a complete WTF in all the best possible ways, I might add, because I couldn't have speculated any of this was actually gonna happen the way it did. Of course, we begin with Ariam's funeral, which was a passive experience for me, very much coming on the coattails of the character's own death. I said in the previous episode, you know, I'm not really feeling anything for this character because we didn't really know this character. If I'm feeling any sort of emotions, it's, you know, cursorily of what all of the other crew of the Discovery are feeling for this character's loss now. Everyone gets to, you know, speak their own eulogy, their own personal eulogy for Ariam. You know, all of those sentiments and words were touching. It was interesting how they loop in this divide now that exists between Stamets and Culber, and similarly so with Ash and Burnham. And then we cap that entire, you know, scenario off with Saru singing. And I'm just thinking about earlier in Season 2 of The Orville, we had Gordon Malloy, you know, burst out in song, and I'm like, I think Gordon probably passed off the song a little better. I don't know if that was Doug Jones singing or not. I have no idea. But, you know, it was like a very alien sort of funeral dirge, I guess, in a sense. That was the sensibilities, the emotion that it sort of equated in me, and I was just kind of like watching and like, okay, alrighty then. Very much not the same sort of emotional sentiment that we had at the end of Wrath of Khan with the loss of Spock, you know, where that really was emotionally impactful. And when Kirk chokes delivering his eulogy for Spock, it never fails. It's been so many years since I first saw it, and it always still brings me a pang of emotion and gets me misty-eyed and teary-eyed and crying. This was antithetical to that. It's just sort of a passive funerary procession. I did think it was somewhat interesting how we see they're like downloading and or erasing all of the internal information to the cyber brain, you know, what once housed the, for lack of a better term, soul, you know, speculatively speaking, that was Ariam's. You know, the idea of wiping the husk of any potential holdover and then being rid of it for all intents and purposes. You know, this being a sort of counter movement to Control's potentially trying to take, you know, reclaim control over Ariam or the Discovery or Section 31's vessel. And there's something going on Section 31's vessel, because Leland gets his eyes poked out, and I'm like, is this Georgiou? Or is it more likely, you know, their ship is actually under the control of Control or something like that? You know, they do say early on in the episode, the Control AI of the present day within, you know, Discovery's timeline proper, it must have found a means to run away, to hide itself. It's laying dormant for a time because these temporal incursions are from the Control in the future. the control in the future is trying to manipulate the past and make it so that the control in the present, which is that future incarnation's past, it's trying to make it gain dominance and have control over the timeline, how everything unfolds. So it's very, very possible, I think very probably, the Section 31 ship is now housing that control AI of the present day, and is very much trying to manipulate events. I think it was signature in trying to capture the Red Angel, which is what the entire plot of the episode ends up revolving around. And talk about the craziest, like, late 80s, early to mid 90s B-movie sci-fi malarkey. I don't get me wrong, I loved this episode, but it was a schlock fest, the likes of which I haven't seen in a very long time. Using Burnham seemingly sort of against herself as bait for herself, who is supposedly the Red Angel. Like I said, they got it out of the way right away. Burnham is the angel. We have the signature. It's what Ariam knew. It was inside of her, all that information. The signature matches. Culber does the test, and I like that. They're sort of in baby steps getting Culber back in line with his former life, his former duties, and things like that. And without that being purposefully to bring him back, in a sense, it's going to have the side effect of also getting him more comfortable with who he is now and who he once was, as a result of all of that. So I liked that. But as I said, putting it out there, brass tacks, it's, Burnham, she's the Red Angel, and temporal incursions, and she's, she's leading us to all these different points, and we've only gone to like 4 of them so far, or 3 of them so far, and there's so many left, and not being able to pinpoint exactly when and where the Red Angel is going to appear, and then having to to lure it, for all intents and purposes, from right out of the gate. As somebody who is a time travel fan, and of course Spock mentions the grandfather paradox, I was already like thinking 6 steps ahead, like, well, wait a minute. If this is a future incarnation of the current Michael Burnham, won't she know this is a bait and switch? Won't that future incarnation know not to come because she doesn't want herself to be captured, her mission to be ceased for all intents and purposes by them? It would have to be someone else, or it would have to be a Michael Burnham from an offshoot, a temporal offshoot from the current timeline, for that to make sense, for her to be willing to come back and try to save her younger self, however older, she may in turn be, because if she had any foreknowledge of that, she never would come, and then Michael Burnham in the present day would tentatively die. And so, the temporal mechanics of all of that were astounding to me. Like, it was just, like I said, it's all the best throwbacks to the late 80s, 90s, mid 90s, sci-fi B movies, and just the schlocky nature of those things. To go back to what Red Letter Media is always talking about, the schlocky movies they watch and everything. I thought it was really interesting. Some of the characterization and the character interplay in this episode was kind of mind-blowing, and some of it was awesome, some of it was just straight up odd. There is that point between Georgiou and Stamets and Culber where she's like almost kind of getting flirty with Stamets in a way, when they're talking about the Red Angel tech and all that kind of stuff, after it's been revealed that Section 31 Project Daedalus was their own creation and whatever like that. And like the tension, the almost sexual tension, it's completely one-sided on Georgiou's half, on her part, where they have to blatantly say, Stamets, he comes out, he says, like, I'm gay. You do know that, right? Whether his mirror universe counterpart was, a la Captain Jack Harkness from Doctor Who, pansexual or not, remains to be seen. But I'm sure anyone who is on the anti-SJW, anti-LGBTQ plus, anti-feminist hate bandwagon for Star Trek Discovery, this was, table flipping, this reveal. They said it several times. Of course, Culber had to say, you do know he's gay. Stamets had to say, you do know I'm gay. And we're all gay, and whatever like that. So I'm sure people were losing their ever-loving minds about that. But I thought, within the context of the scene, I'm like, what is going on here? And it was kind of off-putting to me, just in the sense of how, abnormal it was, but then the cap on the bottle is Tilly's serviceable. What the hell was that? What just happened? Whatever her line is, equating exactly what I'm thinking as I'm watching it unfold. If she had not said that, if they had not broken, the strangeness, the oddity of that scene, that interchange, with that line being interjected, it would have been a loss for me. I would have been, that would have been something I denoted in this discussion as bad move. I didn't like that scene. Tilly saved that scene. Contrarily, earlier on when, all of our principal players, with the exception of Tilly, are talking in the captain's ready room about, Burnham being the Red Angel and all this, that, and the other thing, and then Tilly comes in. I could not stand the way she entered the room with her flopping over her words and whatever like that, and shoe and mouth syndrome. They still write this character annoyingly, and it's a shame because the first half of season 2 was the most redeeming her character was for me. It was very intriguing to me, and I think there are moments, they're sort of teeter-tottering back and forth between moments where she is highly, highly serviceable to the story, to the plot of the episode, but then all other times she's pedantic and annoying, and her anxiety and shoe and mouth syndrome is highly unwelcome for me. I don't enjoy it. But going back to other character interactions in this episode that excelled in the episode, you had that nice moment of solidarity between Non, the security officer from the Enterprise, and Burnham in one of the corridors after the funeral, where there's this reconciliation between them. They both have a new respect for each other. They can both, they're very empathetic toward each other and can see where each other was coming from in those final moments. And they're both grateful that, sort of all of the Odd Couple, without these two mindsets that are so differing in that hellacious scenario, we wouldn't have gotten through it, that kind of thing. They both appreciated how integral to the way things played out they both were in that moment, in the heat of that moment. And I really liked it. It was very brief. It was a very short thing, almost blink and you'll miss it, but it was a really heartening thing to develop these characters and their rapport with each other. I wish we had more of that with some of the bridge crew. Again, going back to the funeral procession itself, the funerary procession, you do have people speaking the eulogies and everything like that. And it gives us a little bit, very, sort of cursory, characterization on some of those characters, develops them just a little bit more. But you had other great interactions, like between Ash and Burnham in the early portion of the episode, where, there is still that divide, that chasm between them. And it is later there is a reconciliation between them in the horror, the fear of what is oncoming, for all intents and purposes. A la almost putting a witch to death, like having to tie Burnham to this chair and risk her life for the purposes of baiting the Red Angel. And in the build up to that, she's very emotional. I mean, Sonequa Martin Green was acting her ass off in this episode. And all through season 2, we've seen a Burnham who is much more sort of vulnerable, sort of on edge, very much fallible and needing to learn. She's on a learning curve and sort of finding her way. For all of those people who continually bang on the drum that, oh, she's a Mary Sue, you're out of your freaking minds, as far as I'm concerned. You're not really paying attention to the depiction of the character. Even though the character is in central focus and everything is revolving around her, as we see by the end of this episode, it's not strictly all about her. And it's very much about her as a character, as a person finding her way. And making those mistakes and stumbling over those hurdles, but then picking herself back up and dusting herself back off and getting back to the job at hand, getting back to whatever lies ahead, and whatever that directive is for herself. As part of herself as a human being, as part of her career, her familial entanglements with Spock and everything. And that is another, sequence in this episode that just excelled, was Ethan Peck as Spock going up against, Michael Burnham, his sister, after she finds out what happened with her parents, what the reasoning was behind their penultimate demise, having to do with Leland, having to do with, talking about Schlocky, the time crystal, all of these time travel things, they all are fueled by crystals. I mean, okay, so are the warp drives of all the ships and whatever like that. But it's an interesting sort of Final Fantasy-esque or Dragon Quest-esque RPG. It's a magical crystal. It's a time crystal. Just something about that made me laugh. It felt very, very schlocky and whatever. But after, Burnham has revealed to her that it was one of these crystals. They stole it from the Klingon homeworld, Kronos, and her parents had it. They were scientists and engineers, and they were working on Project Daedalus and whatever like that. And she clocks Leland, breaks his nose. Which I have to agree with Spock was in fact very, very satisfying. He wished he had been there. He loathed that he was not there to witness it himself. But I can tell you, Spock, it was hella satisfying. But I loved that interchange, the way basically Spock toward the end as well, he's like, it would be less than advantageous, if you perished here, because then I would be brought up on charges for another murder of a Starfleet officer. And Burnham's like, you got such a way with words. That rapport, that interplay, I love it. I love, the actors cast in this series are just, they're bar none. They are all pitch perfect in their characterizations, their roles. Pike, Anson Mount, Spock, Ethan Peck, Michael Burnham, Sonequa Martin Green, all that kind of stuff. They all excelled in this episode, and those moments between Spock and Burnham especially. This really felt like Spock. There has been some talk that his lashing out in a sense at her in the previous episode, and being very emotional in his outburst, and seeming to get almost a sick sense of twisted pleasure in calling her out, reaming her out as he did in the previous episode. Some people had said Spock is a psycho. They made him a psycho murderer. He's out of his ever-loving mind. He's nothing like the Spock of old. They've killed the franchise. All of that stuff that everyone is clamoring, raising their pitchforks and torches to the skies to scream out. And I couldn't disagree more. There were aspects of his character that still harkened back to, that time, tentatively, between the cage and Where No Man Has Gone Before. Also harkening back to Yesteryear, the Star Trek The Animated Series episode, where the young child Spock had, emotions coming to the fore all the time. It was something he had a hard time wrestling with. So I didn't think it was completely out of character, but a lot of people did. And so I feel like this episode is like this, okay, if you can actually tell me with a straight face that you're not getting a personification of Spock that feels like Nimoy's Spock, that feels like the Spock we know and love in this episode, you're out of your mind. You're a naysayer. You're just, banner waving. You're on the bandwagon of hate. And you're being unobjective about it, because as both a Star Trek fan and somebody who's trying to watch this as objectively as possible, it fits, it works with the Spock we know. The Spock we know as, confined to that particular time period of the character's life in his personal history. And so, again, that interaction between them, it was just a great, great scene. It was great scene after great scene, as far as I was concerned. Even amidst all of the schlocky, overbearing nature of this, of having to bait the Red Angel, who is, tentatively speaking, for all intents and purposes, seems to be Michael Burnham herself, the signature matches. And I didn't... It's one of those things, again, calling back on Red Letter Media, the Mr. Plinkett videos. Whenever he's talking about Star Trek films or Star Wars films, he's like, there is this particular catchphrase he says, you might not have noticed it, but your brain did. And I had a very, on-the-nose moment like that where I didn't quite notice it fully, but my brain was working it out. There is that point where they talk about the signature that Ariam had in her data file matches pitch perfectly Burnham. And in thinking, in speculating throughout the course of the episode, well, if it was Burnham, wouldn't she know this was a trap? Wouldn't she avoid it at all costs for the simple purpose that it would mess up her mission, that it would cease her mission, even if only temporarily, that they want to trap her? So she wouldn't come, so it has to be someone else. And I was already thinking, building up to the reveal of who it ends up being, Michael Burnham's mother. I was already in the process, the wheels were turning, thinking, well, if it isn't her, but it's somebody with her, the same genetic signature, they would be able to detect if it was a Burnham from a different timeline or a different universe, all of the mirror universe or something. The quantum signature would not align. How else could the genetic signature align? And I wasn't quite there yet when the reveal came at the end. I was like, oh, I was still sort of in the mindset, oh, it's Burnham, it's future Burnham. And as the camera zooms in, and Burnham tied to the chair, now resuscitated by the Red Angel, who's now on her knees, hands and knees before her, as she says, Mom? Like, boom, it went off in my mind. I was like, that's the answer. That's why the genetics match. That's where it was leading. And I was like, I just wasn't quite there yet in mind. But I was working it out, and I was almost there by the time we get the reveal. Like, if we had a cliffhanger and not had the answer, I would have eventually figured it out and come on and said, okay, next week it's going to be her mom. But in fact, that's who it was. It's her mother. And I'm kind of mind blown by that because her parents are supposed to be dead. I can only think that in the event that, purportedly, allegedly had taken her parents' lives, her mother must have just barely managed to get to that Project A-list Red Angel suit and escape it. And from some clandestine, hidden archive or hideout somewhere in the distant future, perhaps even the Discovery itself, going back to that Short Treks episode where it's far-flung in the future and it has to stay stationed next to this nebula in space. Perhaps that's where she continually goes back to. Who knows? But for all intents and purposes, her mother must have just barely escaped with her life. And this is why she's carrying out these temporal incursions. And maybe the very first one was saving Michael's life as a child. What burgeoned that divide, as we saw in the flashback in the previous episode, between she and Spock as children. And it makes so much sense that Burnham is the integral factor because it's a mother's love that continually, throughout all time, space-time, is rejuvenating her and protecting her life and making sure she doesn't expire, It just makes all kinds of sense that it would be Burnham's mother, saving her daughter's life time and time and time again. It isn't so self-serving as it once seemed to be, with it being Burnham as the Red Angel saving herself. Or orchestrating herself in certain directions to save others and whatever like that. And it could very much hinge on Burnham's mother, that this entire timeline, whether it aligns with TOS proper or not, whether it's an offshoot, if it's a completely different timeline or whatever like that, the whole canon versus timeline argument, prime or otherwise, offshoot or otherwise, whatever. It all seems to hinge on Burnham's mother, in fact, and her wanting to protect and preserve the life of her daughter. And that just kind of blows my mind. The whole thing blows my mind. Everything about this episode, it was completely something I couldn't have seen coming. I couldn't have predicted. And yet, it all makes so much sense in the end. Some of it doesn't make sense. Some of it's schlocky as all hell and seems goofy and like, where did they come up with that? Are they being serious? Is this not a parody? But no. At the end of the day, all of the good outweighs the bad. The needs of the many, or in this case, the enjoyment, the entertainment of the moments are many, where the problems I had were few. And so, yeah, it was a hell of an episode that I couldn't have seen playing out the way that it did. And I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of episode 10 of season 2 of Star Trek Discovery, The Red Angel. If you've seen it as well. If you agree with me that it was schlocky as all hell, but love it or hate it, anything goes in the comments below. Just as long as you are respectable and sharing your own opinion, as well as respectful of others, even if they happen to clash with your own, and all that good stuff. But, I mean, for me, this was a 2 thumbs up episode, or at least a thumb and a half. you know, because there were elements, as I say, that were a little schlocky and just sort of out of touch. But it all came together in the end for me, and I enjoyed it, and I was on the edge of my seat, and you know, it satisfied me in the end. It was a satisfying experience. Even Giorgio, who I just said in, you know, episodes past, episode discussions past, I said I'm not really highly entertaining the idea of watching a Section 31 focus series with her as the primary character, the primary lead. And I'm kind of changing my tune because her performance, you know, as portrayed by Michelle Yeoh in this season, the way they are writing her characterization, there is some more humanity that's coming to the fore in her character, and it's making her that much more likable for me. And the more I'm watching of her, this evolution of character, you know, abiding the fact that she is not the one who just blinded Leland over on the Section 31 ship, I could actually almost see, if this is the kind of way the character is going to be written and portrayed, I could almost see watching a Section 31 series with Giorgio as the lead, you know, the primary character. But yeah, you know, that's going to be pretty much it for me on this. If you enjoyed this video and would like to consider supporting my channel, please have a look at my PayPal support link posted both in the description as well as the comments below, where you have options very much akin to Patreon, where you can set up a monthly contribution, one-time only kind of thing, send me a personal message alongside a contribution requesting topics I may discuss in the future, ask for shout-outs, make recommendations of things I may check out, and give you a shout-out down the line if I happen to talk about them. And anything you saw fit to send my way would, you know, be 2 thumbs up for me, and just secure my longevity on YouTube for the foreseeable future, you know, that kind of thing. And I would just really appreciate you taking the time. And so, yeah, otherwise, that'll be pretty much it for me on this. Bring on the next one, because I can't wait to see where we go from here. It looks like we're going back to Kronos, too. There's going to be Klingons involved. What can you do? You know, and live long and prosper.